Welcome to the super exciting HR fun time. That was a great voice, great singing voice. I think I have a voice for print. There we go. Not like a
That
face
is a
for
voice
radio.
for Prince. It's excellent.
Voice for print. Welcome to the super exciting HR fun time. I'll get it right sometime. I'm Enzo, and this is Dan. Hi,
Hello.
Dan.
Hi.
Dan is my HR manager at Accounting Pros, and today we have a very exciting topic to discuss, which is independent contractor or NAW, getting the classification right or else. Thanks for joining us, and we're excited to dive deeply into this exciting topic today.
Enzo, nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well, Dan.
I was wondering, given the last time we connected, we talked about misclassification, and that is the topic of today. And I was curious on misclassification red flags. I understand that when you're signing a new client and you're going through their books, I'm wondering how many times do you see contractor payments and pause to yourself and ask, should this really be a W-2 employee? Does that ever come up in your mind?
Can I say 99.99% of the time I see something and I'm like, oh my gosh, this doesn't look right. And they always seem to have just, they're so obvious. You know, like I see the same person being paid the same amount every week or every month, or just stuff that just sticks out at you. Or like, that doesn't pass the smell test. And I'd say that's a big part of our initial conversation is, hey, did you know this? And sometimes people are receptive and sometimes not.
I can imagine. It's for business owners, whether it's a small business or an enterprise-wide business. I see these folks thinking that it's more of a choice. It's their choice, or it's the worker's choice of how they want to be paid. Is that the kind of conversations they have with you?
Yeah, I have seen people, I've heard people say things like, this person wants to be paid as a contractor. Like the person who they've hired wants to get paid as a contractor. And they do think it's that person's choice. However, they are doing all kinds of things that would say otherwise, that they're not a contractor, that they're actually an employee. Like they are representing themselves as an employee of the company, or they have set hours, or they have to follow certain protocols, or they're getting paid as a person that, not a business. And they don't do this for other people. They're doing this full time for them. And I know it's because, I won't say I know, I can't be in everybody's mind, but it's likely because the contractor, the person who wants to be a contractor, thinks that there's some kind of tax advantage, or they can get out of paying payroll taxes or something like that. And then they get a big surprise at the end of the year when they realize, oh my gosh, I haven't set anything aside for my end of year taxes, and now I'm in big time trouble.
Yes, I have seen that many times, including a very close acquaintance of mine who truly was an independent contractor, I suppose, if you looked at it under a deep enough microscope. But he was not prepared for those taxes. And that was conversations I've had with many people. And I can definitely understand that. I think you hit it right on the head. The first item is that these folks, whether it's a hiring manager or a business owner or the actual worker, they feel that they're going to save on taxes by going this route. And
Yeah.
I don't know how much more clearly to be able to put that in their brain that that's not accurate, I guess, until they go through it.
Yes. And on the flip side, I have seen employers who've thought the same. In their mind, they're thinking I can just switch them to a contractor. I don't have to pay the taxes. I don't have benefits or anything like that. And now this person costs me less. And then the person who is misclassified at the end of the year realizes that they don't have a W-2 and there have been no taxes taken out. And there was some miscommunication in that situation. So now they have to still come up with, the same amount that they had to pay on the flip side. But to me, that's a bit more tragic, because that is a business owner, I think, who should have more knowledge of what they're actually doing. You should have some basic knowledge. You don't have to be an expert, but they should have some knowledge and should be able to make educated decisions like, W-2 or contractor, and not harm the employee in the process or harm the other person in the process. And not doing that due diligence and understanding what the rules actually are can create a really bad relationship with the person that you're working with. And if I was that person who was misclassified and I had to come up with a bunch of money at the end of the year, I might think about finding another job because I would be pretty mad, be pretty pissed off.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I see this in a lot of different areas. So sometimes you just have hiring managers that have a budget and they want to be able to hire someone, but that person is too expensive. And then they realize, oh, if I don't have to pay all these extra costs, I can bring this person on. Or I've seen it to where, we have part-time employees or part-time workers coming in and people think, oh, I'll just hire them as a contractor as maybe like a trial period. Then we'll convert them later, which does happen way more than I think anyone wants to realize. And I do give a lot of credit to business owners. Independent contractor classification requirements are pretty niche in this industry and HR in general. And to get it right every single time is not something I expect anyone to do unless you've been living that for a long time. So I could totally understand. And like I said, I've seen it across the board from CEOs to hiring managers. They get that incorrect. And oftentimes when it is the actual worker who says they want to be an independent contractor, that's where we really have a lot of risk that I don't think people realize, because they think because the worker that's how they wanted to do. That doesn't stop them at all from filing a claim, whether that's unemployment or anything of that nature. But one thing that we never talk about is if you have these contractors coming on site to your location or your client's site or whatever the situation is, and this individual gets hurt and files a workers' comp claim, and they don't personally have any business insurance because you hired them as an individual versus an S corp or an LLC. But also, if that worker unintentionally causes harm on your client's site and causes some type of monetary damage, that's now on your business, not the worker, because you probably didn't put anything in that contract to be able to mitigate that risk, nor did you possibly have them have any type of, errors and omissions insurance, which is huge. And then that all falls onto you.
Right. Yeah. So I often think about the problem being that a worker files a WUC, like workers' comp claim, and then that kicks off a bunch of different audits. But I don't think I ever really think about if they do something harmful or something bad happens on the client's property or with the work that's being done. And it's that I think is a really big problem, because like we have a huge policy. No one's going to tap into it because we're always doing the right thing. But, we take care of our business and we have all the right insurance in place. And I don't think that other people are really thinking about that. If they're, just a sole operator, probably misclassified, maybe not as, I'll say sophisticated, but that's not actually true. There are a lot of sole operators that are very sophisticated, but there are some that are not and aren't going to have all the right things. And if you're not checking all the boxes, you're still putting all that liability on yourself. Anything that happens, any problems that are created, I guarantee the person who is misclassified probably not going to be willing or able to take on that liability. And it could break them too. If they end up getting forced to take on that liability for whatever reason, just that could bankrupt them and they haven't planned.
100%.
So now you've also set them up for even worse financial outcome. So I think it's really a huge responsibility and a duty for the employer to follow through and make sure, okay, if you're a contractor, then let's actually go through the checklist to make sure that we have collected everything from you. So that way I know if something bad happens, we're all good.
Yeah, definitely. And that checklist is super important. not only for just onboarding in general when you're onboarding an employee, but you should have the same type of checklist when you're onboarding a contractor for your business. That is the most compliant way to do it. And also, it just creates efficiency for you down the line. So you're just having a repeatable, compliant process. What I'd like to talk about, though, is a little bit more about why do these small businesses take this risk and why do you think that it can backfire on them? So we talked about the belief that it's cheaper to hire a 1099 contractor, or it's cheaper because I'm not going to have to pay my employer portion of the taxes. But are there any others that you can think of? In my mind, I'm thinking there's a perceived flexibility
Right.
around things, lack of understanding. You brought that up. Or they're receiving advice from non-HR folks who are saying you should be a contractor because you're going to make more money this way. I've seen that a lot.
You mean they're asking ChatGPT for HR advice?
Well, I don't want to throw anything on your side, but
No,
I've heard
no.
it from accountants as well.
I have heard it from accountants, not my own because they're perfect in every way, never done
Yes.
anything wrong.
We've done our training as well.
Oh, yes. I also think so it's, cheaper, but it's also easier. So you don't have to set up payroll tax accounts. You don't have to set up benefits or think about a handbook or policies and procedures. You're just like, okay, you're just going to work for me and that's it. And then I let you go and that's it. And that's as simple as the relationship goes. And I pay you in between, I guess. But really, I think that's a lot of it too, is it can be sort of challenging. You've got to figure out, where do I need to get licensed? What do I need to do? When do I need to have this done by? Where do I put that information? Now I have to set up a payroll software to do all this. So it can be very overwhelming, which is why we do that for our clients, because, there's no reason for them to handle that on their own. So I think that's probably a really big one. It's just, it seems on the outside more simple, but ultimately it's still, it still has its own difficulties, because when they have to get compliant, then you've got to figure a whole new thing out.
Absolutely. And I love you just mentioned something that brought a real life example. You said they don't have to have a handbook or have to sign a handbook. And one of the red flags that I see, especially when I'm auditing things, is I see that some businesses have their contractors signing all of the same paperwork as their employees, which also includes the handbook, and just really drives that point home that they really don't understand what the difference is here and why there is concern and risk.
It would be better if they didn't sign that, right? Like, I think it makes it look a lot worse if you just onboard them like a regular employee, but then you pay them like a contractor. I imagine an auditor would have a field day if they saw that.
I agree. At the same time, maybe they could feign ignorance, like, oh, I didn't know, because that's really how the penalties really stack up, as if it's an intentional misclassification versus just, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, which you still don't get out of the penalties, but it's a little better when you're not, doing it purposefully.
So I can do the Dave Chappelle line, I didn't know I couldn't do that, for his friend that gets out of trouble. Like, I can do that, I guess. Like, oh, I didn't know I couldn't misclassify people. I don't want to pay the fine. It's okay.
Well, it may or may not work depending on who your friends are, I guess.
Sure, I need to have some friends at the top.
Very much. So red flags, payments to contractors that look like their payroll, same amount each pay period. You're paying an individual. They've been on payroll for, let's call it 3 years, doing the exact same thing. Maybe there's even another individual with the same job title in the books. So those are clear red flags, but any others that you've seen, maybe reimbursements or those type of things that come up often from your perspective?
Well, I do. I also see people paying their spouses a lot, thinking this will help me reduce my taxable liability if I pay my husband, my wife, my partner, whatever. And the relationship doesn't really matter from my understanding, unless I'm wrong.
I think with your children, you do have an out there, but you still have to pay them as employees. You just don't have to follow all of the same rules when it's a family type of business.
Sure, because your family's probably not going to sue you.
Right.
Depends on your family, I guess. Yeah. Also, okay. So reimbursements, things like that. I do see that a lot. Using the same sort of reimbursement platform, same processes. Yeah. I mean, that's just if you're acting like an employee. It's like if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck and quacks like a duck. Maybe it's an independent contractor. Maybe it's an
Maybe.
employee.
I think that the biggest one there is when we're having contractors working full-time hours, and there's no clear project scope, or they don't even have a statement of work, which I want to digress a little bit. I have known many, many managers who think, oh, I'm putting this under my statement of work, SOW spend. No one's ever going to look at this. This is that spend for a reason. And people think because they have a statement of work and they're working to that, true, it's a true project, but that does not negate the fact that we still have to make sure that we're looking at both how the work is being performed, how it's being managed, and how that worker themselves has set themselves up as an independent business.
So we have some folks who utilize time tracking in Gusto and also project level time tracking in Gusto. And I know that that's available for employees. And I'm pretty certain, like 99.99% sure that contractors can also follow the same process and book time in general, but also book time to a project. So does that mean that if you have an SOW or assigned engagement and you have allocated a certain amount of hours, for example, for a project for specific, work to be done, and they're tracking their time in that and the time tracker, is that okay? Or does it have to be milestone based or goal based or things like that? Like what do we have to do here?
Great question, and no true answer, because yes, it's perfectly fine that a contractor is tracking their time and their deliverables to that scope, and it's important that they are doing that. You want to make sure that everything is accurate and be able to manage how much time is actually being spent on different projects for your clients. But that's why we have to look at the whole picture with any independent contractor. And what I always do going into the situation where I'm looking at everything is automatically I'm assuming everyone is an employee because they are working for you. That's just the most compliant and risk mitigating way to look at things. But we have to really look at these key tests to be able to determine what that true classification is. And it's not just based off of scope and tracking to a project. It's really the behavioral control, who controls how, when, and where the work is done. I think in this day and age, especially after COVID, we have so many more people working remotely. So I think this one is going to be a little bit more tricky as we continue on this everyone working remote type of environment. But then we have to look at the financial control, who's providing the tools, who is setting the payment terms, who is bearing the risk for profit or loss. Really, all of that should be on the independent contractor if they're truly independent. But even that has a caveat. I've worked with lots of companies that have either security clearance or other protocols in place that they have to have the contractors using their laptops or their equipment, or they're going on site and they have to use specialized tools because it's specific to that industry. So there are some nuances there. And I think unless we're in California, we may be able to get around that. And then last but not least, we really have to look at the relationship of what this is between the employer and the contractor or the worker. So we talked about a lot of this already, but is it project based or is it ongoing and indefinite? A big one here is the work actually core to your business? And that one is a little bit confusing because of course it's core to my business. It's my business. Everything I do in my business is core to it. But truly what we're talking about, so you, Enzo, if we're hiring a marketing team, that or a marketing individual, that's much different than we're hiring an accountant and we're going to pay them as an independent contractor. So we have to look at all of these things in order to make sure that we're really truly understanding this employer-employee relationship or this employer-independent contractor relationship?
Before I respond, my dog was just snoring so loudly, and I was wondering if you can hear it.
I could not.
So, back to the tests or all the ways in which you are reflecting on whether somebody is a contractor or an employee. There used to be a 20-point test that the IRS would provide, and it was really detailed. It was great. But then they went down to three questions, and I think it was the financial responsibility and control behavior, something like that. And I feel like it just becomes grayer and grayer as the years go on. There were really defined things to check off, and now it's a bit more hazy, which is why I think it's great to have somebody like you fact check this. But do you feel like it is becoming hazy because they want to catch people, or they don't want to make it so precise they can capture that payroll tax revenue?
That's a great question. And I think there's a lot of answers there. One, I think with different administrations, they do want to make it a little easier for business owners to be able to hire independent contractors. And on one side, totally legitimate, and it does help people maintain their independent status, and it helps businesses truly save money when they were working with an actual independent contractor because of everything we talked about. But on the other side of that, I just think it's because there is so much legislation that it just becomes murky and confusing, and all the different states have their different say, and then we don't have a necessarily strict federal standpoint where it's yes or no. There's no real black and white answer here because it is all risk-based. So from my point of view, I look at it from a comprehensive audit type of standpoint where we're looking at both the work being done and the worker's relationship to the business. So from my work that I do in this, or my strategy, I look at both the IRS and the Department of Labor and look at their guidelines and focus especially on the high risk states like California, in New York, and because I'm in Colorado, because if it won't hold up in any of those states, the determination that I would come up with, I can safely say that it's not going to hold up anywhere.
Right. Can I tell you something funny that I saw the other day in a client who shall remain nameless, their employee files? They had an onboarding form that they were using. It's nothing through Gusto, some other system that they were using that was sort of homegrown. And they were collecting W-9s and W-4s in the same form from the people that they were hiring.
Oh my goodness.
I was like, who are you hiring? Are these employees? Are these contractors? What is going on? Why are they filling out both? Yeah.
I've never heard or seen that before. That's a new one.
I see all the crazy stuff. I can't name names, but I'm just like, what the heck is going on right now? Don't do that.
Very interesting. That, to me, that just means I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm just going to gather everything.
I will say that the employer is in the state of California.
Uh-oh.
And the person making this form, who shall remain nameless, has worked in HR in their life. And I won't say anything else. But we'll have to get you to talk to them very soon because it was very surprising to see that.
I would love to. And I think I already said this, but I do not fault any HR professional or any accountant for not knowing a lot of these nuanced rules because it is so specific. And unless you're working with a lot of them, a lot of independent contractors, a lot of these factors would never come up. So when they do, I think it's great that we're identifying this, and maybe it's a learning experience for them as well.
We'll talk after the call or after this, the recording. What was the other thing? Okay, the other thing is, we have state and local tax, specifically sales tax that we deal with a lot. We've got use tax as well, but when we are doing our economic nexus, physical nexus, like all the nexus sort of tracking, we're trying to understand many things. Where is your business located? Where are your employees located? Where's your inventory located? What type of sales do you have? And then what is the volume of sales, whether dollar amount or transaction volume? So is it 100 or 1 million sales? But the thing that trips our clients up and lots of people up is they think that if they don't classify somebody as an employee, it does not create a, a connection with the state, like a physical nexus connection. So then they don't collect sales tax in the states that they're required to. And then our lovely not HR manager, SALT manager, Keenan, has to have a difficult conversation where he says, like, you actually did create a relationship. And this is why, because this state counts contractors, as a connecting factor. And so it's not just the payroll tax, it becomes this whole other thing. And then it's like the point at which you brought them on. Do you want to get compliant from then forward? Like if you had big dollars, big ticket sales, it could be really expensive. So then we go down this other rabbit hole, which is even more difficult to unravel, I think.
I 100% agree. And I have seen that specifically with quite a few businesses where they were in business for multiple years and that never came up. And I don't think it's until something triggers, oh, I should have been paying sales tax in this state for the last 3 years, that anything even is questioned. Do you happen to know, like, what is that process when an audit happens? Does something flag that kind of audit?
Well, so I know that if someone does file a workers' comp claim, usually states get involved and try to understand, is this something that we need to actually go back and collect payroll tax on? And at which point they may decide to collect it from the beginning of the relationship on the employer-employee side, plus all the penalties. And then they might look into sales tax and might see, okay, you also haven't classified people correctly. And I think everybody wants their revenue. So what we do is we sort of come up with, this is what's actually happening. You've got sales here, people here. This is what you've actually been doing. This is what you should have been doing. If you get compliant as of the moment you should have been compliant, this is what you'll need to come up with, for the most part. Sometimes we have to work with states to get exact penalty amounts and things like that. It's can be challenging. Sometimes people want to get compliant at a certain point and say, well, let's cross our fingers and hope that we don't get audited. And we're just going to get compliant from today forward. And that is going back to our previous conversation, is really how much risk is a business willing to take, and what happens if their luck runs out, like what happens next? Because that could be really devastating for a business to have to come up with everything. Luckily, there are payment plans. So we do help our clients set up payment plans for sales tax. I don't think we've actually helped anybody set up payment plans for payroll tax anytime in the recent past, because we just, for the current employees, everybody's through Gusto, and usually, most people are doing things mostly right. I don't think that we've had anything too wild come up, but sales tax is a really big one, and that can be really expensive. And the thing with those types of plans is, if you don't make a payment, if you miss a payment by a day, you lose your payment plan. So if you have $100,000 in sales tax debt that you have agreed to pay every month for, the next year or 2 years or whatever, however long you've agreed to it, and you don't also keep any new sales tax up to date as well, because, we're not frozen in time. There's new sales happening too. Then you lose that payment plan. So I think it becomes sort of a downward spiral where you didn't handle the problem, and then you create this huge debt that now you're sort of having to figure out how to pay that off. And then it gets worse over time. Whereas if you had done it right in the beginning, it would have been easier to budget for, because you're not budgeting for penalties, interest, and all that other stuff, because you're paying it on time and you're dealing with it and you're classifying people right, and you're not getting a fun love note from some agency that has figured you out.
Wow.
Oh gosh, accounting is great. HR is great. I feel like it's just like a new fun thing all the time.
Well, I think that speaks directly to business owners then, because these things are real and they need to be busy working on building their business and scaling their business, not worrying about working in the business on all of these different nuances. And that's where we come in, and why you always hire these experts in these fields. Great topic to go down the SALT area, because that does impact everything when we're talking about this. And I guess I really want to be a little bit more, I don't know how to say, I want to be more friendly to the business owners as well, because I do understand the needs for wanting to work with someone as an independent contractor. And I understand the needs of the actual workers who feel that they prefer to be paid as an independent contractor. I know there are lots of them. I've had these conversations with them, and ultimately the solutions that I can offer when I do see a misclassification is that right away we can reclassify them as a W-2. That typically will stop all of the bleeding down the line. Typically, if you're audited and someone sees that you've misclassified someone, but then they see, oh, you classified them as a W-2, you've made that correction yourself, you're going to have a lot more leniency from any of these auditing agencies. So that would be number one, just reclassify them if we have the means to do so. But there are a few other options as well. And I always want to make sure that I'm working with any of the businesses when we're talking about this subject in particular. And if we have to reclassify them, are there any other areas that we can or rearrange the relationship with the worker and the business to be able to classify them as truly independent? So from there, we're looking at the business risk and seeing really what does this look like for their business? Is this going to be a potential audit? If there is ever a reclassification that exists in the relationship and it looks like employment, there is always going to be risk for an audit. So I just need to get that out there. But there are ways that we can look at the relationship and try to adjust it to meet the needs of everyone. And so we can look at the engagement structure. Is it really necessary that you're paying them on payroll, or can you send them through a staffing agency or an employer of record agency? That can typically save you a little bit of money. Often it's about the same cost, but it does eliminate the need to be able to have that workers' comp insurance, or if you were going through a staffing agency or an EOR type of provider and you have to terminate that employee, then the unemployment claim would go to that agency as well, and they build that all into their structure and their fee. So that does keep you a little bit out of that risk if that's what you're worried about from a business owner perspective. But then we can look at other things too. We can look at the actual scope of work. We can look at the contract language to make sure that we're truly dealing with independent business here. And I do have to preface that just because you have a contract in place that says this individual is an independent contractor and lists everything we talked about, that does not protect you. That doesn't give you a golden ticket. That's just one factor in many that we're looking at. And then the biggest thing I think I'm looking at if I'm helping these business owners, do things the right way or at least mitigate this risk is typically when we're dealing with these independent contractors or these workers, the one thing that is the downfall is that these individuals either one, don't actually have a business set up, or they're just have an LLC and they're an LLC of one and they have no other clients and they're really not doing this type of work for anyone else. They could, of course, have done this in the past for other people, but if they're in an audit, what we're going to look at is this individual actually providing these services to other businesses? And of course, if you're on a project that's taking 160 hours for the month, sure, you're not going to have any other clients in that month, but we have to look at it. Have they had other clients within the last 6 months? Those type of things. And then ultimately, if we can change that, or if we can have them set up themselves as an S Corp and paying themselves as a W-2, we have a little bit more leeway there as well, because then we're actually able to prove that there are the employer portion of the taxes being paid. Because at the end of the day, you said it, everyone just wants their piece of the pie. And if they're not getting it, that's what is really triggering these audits.
Yeah. You mentioned not reclassifying them, but having a person go through a staffing agency or employer of record. And there are going to be additional costs to that, and that could end up being about the same as what you would pay if they were an employee. I think another really good idea is for the person or for the people who don't want to deal with all the stuff that comes along with hiring and, figuring out benefits and payroll tax accounts, all that kind of stuff. A PEO is actually a really good option as well because they tend to get really good rates on things like insurance, and because it's really just going through a big pool at that point, and they handle all the payroll tax accounts. From my understanding, it's not like having a relationship with Gusto where you're the employer, you've got all your accounts and everything tied to your business, and they're just remitting, calculating and remitting the taxes. I say there's just like sales tax, there's thousands of jurisdictions, 10,000, there's 12,000 sales tax jurisdictions. It's probably the same for payroll tax. But it is less mentally taxing, I think, for an employer just getting started with just a few people. Getting that PEO going could be a really good choice versus the misclassification or going through a staffing agency. Like I don't have a great feeling about staffing agencies. I feel like they're just kind of, it's like a churn and burn kind of thing where they're just constantly moving through candidates. At least with the PEO, there's more of a close relationship with them, and there's not like a middleman. The PEO is just sort of like invisible behind the scenes.
Sure. Well, I guess when I say staffing agency, typically the ones I'm speaking of have an EOR or a PEO arm as well. So they're able to fill those roles and then also pay them as the employees they are and leasing them out to the companies. But all are viable options. And I think you would have to weigh the actual costs to be able to see if it's actually a benefit to you, or if you should just move forward with hiring an HR person and setting all of that up correctly so that you can pay them. And then you have a really good culture within your organization. Because I think if you're going through an EOR and those type of things, you never want to have that co-employment issue, which is something that could come up. Typically it doesn't, but it is a factor that we have to think about when you're building your business. And if you truly are building a culture and you're wanting these employees to take part in everything that you're doing within your business, having that EOR option does make it a little tricky because they're not truly your employees. They're another business's employees working for you.
Question: what is co-employment? I don't know what that is.
Co-employment is a funny one. It's when two organizations are working with somebody. So in the EOR situation, say I am Acme Inc. and I am hiring a bunch of contingent workers because they're not going to be full-time forever, but I need them right now. So they're not part-time either. They're workers that are working full-time, but I probably only have budget for them for maybe 8 months. So I am paying organization X to payroll them, handle all of the employer portion of everything. And then the co-employment issue would come in is if that EOR is treating them one way, giving them specific documents to sign, their specific handbook, they're on their benefits, they're on their whatever policies they have. They may or may not have a PTO policy, 401k and everything. And then Acme Inc., my company, comes in and we're now going to provide some other services, but also we're going to tell this employee that they have to do things XYZ that may be contradictory to what the EOR is doing. So it just causes confusion. And that's where the co-employment could come in, where now the employee's thinking, oh, I am employed by this company and this company. Which one do I listen to? Which is my true employer of record here? And yes, lots of scenarios like that is what could come up in the co-employment arena.
That seems super confusing. If you sign policies and procedures or handbooks or whatever with one person and you have a whole other thing to sign and there's different rules and maybe different time off, I don't even know. That sounds very confusing. Like just thinking about it without even like being in that situation, it feels overwhelming.
It is. But it's really not. At the end of the day, typically the EOR is signing the paychecks, answering benefits questions. Everything else is being managed by the client that is paying the EOR agency to payroll these folks. So it's not as scary as it sounds, but absolutely there are so many different players involved that I could definitely see how it's confusing, and definitely from the employee's perspective, I'm sure it's very confusing.
Yeah. So, okay, let's pretend that I am somebody coming to you asking, I think I have misclassified some people on my on my books, on my payroll. I think I've paid people the wrong way, and I need you to go through each of those people and figure out what's actually going on. Let's just like general estimate one person, and maybe you get some economies of scale with 10 people because you could work through a bunch of stuff really quickly. But like, how much time does that take? And is there like a lot of effort on the employer side giving you documentation, or like, how do you do that whole thing? And I don't know. It seems like a
Sure.
lot.
It can be a lot, and it really depends on how much documentation the business has in place. For instance, do they actually have a file that has this independent contractor's contract, their W-9, the statement of work, hopefully, the certificates of insurance, those type of things. So that would be number one, and that doesn't take a lot of time as long as the business owner has that and can send it to me and I can review it. I would give it about a day to be able to review the whole contract, look at everything. But then we also want to make sure that we're looking at the actual work being done. So that could take a little bit longer and typically involves uh, either an interview with the manager involved or the supervisor, or if it's the business owner, which is fine. It's an interview, and we just go through the scenarios of what kind of direction do you provide? What is this project for? How are you engaging this worker? For instance, are you telling them to come in 9 to 5? Are you giving them keys to the office? Did you provide them a laptop, an email address? Do you give them business cards? Do they have a phone number and they're answering, "Hey, I work for Acme Inc." or "This is Dan with Acme Inc." So I would have a full interview with the actual person that is managing this independent contractor. But then on the other side, I also have to have an interview with the independent contractor themselves so that I can understand if that worker truly is independent. And when I say interview, typically I like to just have a phone conversation because it's quicker, it's easier. I can put more context into why I'm asking certain questions, and I want to make sure that I'm not leading any of the answers because that would negate everything. But we can do this in email too. And typically, you brought up the 20-point question. My questions would be around 15 for each the hiring manager or the business owner, and then about 10 to 15 questions for the worker themselves. And the worker, I would ask for their business information. So if they've set up an LLC, if they have an EIN, if they have the specific insurances, their business insurance for their business, I would ask for documentation that they have provided services to others. And that can be marketing materials, that can be invoices from other clients within the last 3 to 6 months, so I can prove that they are truly independent. And all of this documentation that I'm asking for is really for me to create an audit proof file that says, yes, we looked at everything and we feel that everything is compliant, that this individual truly is an independent contractor. However, because we are talking about misclassification, chances are that this individual may or may not be an independent contractor. So that documentation, even though it is key, it is also the damning evidence that now we have in place if they are truly misclassified.
Yeah, that stinks. You can't just like throw away the file.
Well,
Oh, I didn't do that work. I don't know what happened. They were
you could.
silly.
Unfortunately, I'm not an attorney, so there's none of that privilege in place. But if it came down to that, we could always bring in an employment attorney and build a case from there.
So you're saying that we need to send you back to school so you can get your law degree?
I would prefer no.
Hard pass. Okay, so what if you find that somebody is a contractor and a year passes, 2 years pass, things change, businesses aren't static, job descriptions aren't static. How often should somebody revisit this relationship? Is it like a yearly thing? Whatever. What is it?
I would say at minimum, it should be yearly. Best practice would be 6 months. I mean, that's a little give or take because you could have a project that is 7 months, and I would not say let's reclassify at 6 months or test it again at 6 months. But so we would have to look at the actual length of time, and then if everything else was good, but the project was 13 months, and we had everything else checked the box, I wouldn't be as concerned, and we could probably go through that reclassification or the retesting pretty quickly. But yeah, minimum a year. Best practice every 6 months.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question that I get a lot from clients. So they often pay contractors flat fees. So maybe it's like $500 a month or a week. I don't even know. I'm just making up numbers. $5,000 a month. Or they're doing hourly, like we talked about before with the hour tracking inside of Gusto. But what about things like commission, bonuses, reimbursements? Are there limitations to how you can actually pay somebody and still, everything else aside, still count them as a contractor? Or are there only a handful of ways that you can pay them and it's still legit?
I think that unless you have a project-based scope and that's the amount that you're paying, anything other than that does throw up a red flag. I don't think that there is a wrong answer here, though, because we could be paying independent contractor hourly. They set their hourly rate. They may or may not put in multiple hours. For instance, like a plumber. A plumber could come on with a quote, but his time could actually take 7 hours when he thought it could take 2, and you may have to pay for that full 7 hours. So there's some flexibility there. Commissions are interesting. I have seen a lot of businesses pay commissions as and file a 1099 on that. You do have some sales positions that are purely commission based. I would still consider those, they should be W-2. And we would have to look at every scenario in order to actually give a real answer. But anything other than really the project based, when we're working in these professional settings and you're not a plumber or a service industry type of profession, I definitely think that the safest way is that we're paying these folks on a project based fee.
I'm also hearing the answer for all these questions is it depends. Are they a contractor or an employee? Well, it depends on all of the stuff that you have to know.
It's very true.
It's a lot.
So that's why the IRS doesn't, I'm sorry, that's why the federal government doesn't say black or white, because it's all gray.
Yeah. That seems bad for us, Dan. I want it to be black and white. I want a checklist, and I want to say this is a yes and this is a no, not a this is a maybe. Dig in some more.
Of course. Well, I think that it actually is better that it's a maybe, because we should be digging in and looking under the hood and making sure that things are truly compliant, because you want your business to be safe and continue to be in business. So having these answers is critical for that success.
So I won't ask you to get too political here, but we just had a change in administration at the start of the year, and I'm sure many laws have already changed or are in the process of being changed. Do you think that it's about to get more strict, less strict? Like, do you think that things will change with these type of classifications in the next 3.5 years?
I do think that they will get more strict in terms of how states recognize them. Federally, I do not think it will change, because we've seen it flip-flop so many times over the past 15 years. But I do think states are going to be more and more proactive in this, and most likely are going to be following California's role. I think California does go a little bit too much on the employee side, which is great, but it does it is complex and has a lot more complications in terms of making the right decision, because ultimately they just want everyone to be an employee. That's how I view it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but that's how they see it. And I think New York's right around the corner from that in their classification rights. And they don't. New York's really interesting. If you have any contractor that you're paying, I can't remember, I think it's over $800, you have to have a contract in place. So that also puts things in more perspective for business owners, because I think oftentimes when we are dealing with these independent contractors, I don't want to say business owners are sketchy or anything, but when they are trying to save money and just pay that 1099, it's much easier just to issue that payment and not have to have actual structured compliance in a contract in place, because then you have to be held to whatever is in that contract. And I think it just gets a little bit more tricky as we're going along.
It's okay. You can call us sketchy. It's fine. We're all a little sketchy.
It's all right.
Yeah. Sketchy, lazy, whatever. No, I'm just kidding.
we just want to make things as efficient as possible. So I totally get it.
Yeah. This. So I guess that leads me to my next question, and maybe you've already answered it. I was going to ask, how often does this stuff change? There are certain states that have fewer rules in place in benefit of the employee, and it seems like we're going to go towards states having more control or more say in the relationship, or I think it would be some changes in laws in those the states that are more leaning toward the employer right now. So we can probably expect to see some legislation maybe come up in new states and maybe get approved. And then we have to start following California's rules, which now become the current state's rules. So it's not California's anymore. So it does make sense that if you are doing a review, that for the most part, you're looking at California, because that is going to probably be the new standard in the next handful of years. And you might as well go through the whole process now completely, because you're going to have to do it again later if you don't do it now.
I think that is exactly right. I want to always make sure that I'm looking at it from as much of a risk mitigation standpoint as possible. And so, and we did talk about it a little bit earlier, if we can pass the California rule, then we can pass it anywhere. So if we can classify an independent contractor in California, we can classify them as independent in any other state. But because I know not all businesses are in California, I would just use that as my main factor, and then we would have the discussion of what these risks really look like. And again, I'm going to answer with the maybe, but it would all be case by case.
Right. Yeah. So if there is somebody that you have worked with and you've done this whole, I don't know, all the homework, all the research, all the deep digging and diving and whatever else to sort out, is somebody classified properly or not, and you find out that they are not classified properly, that they are an independent contractor, and you talk to the employer and they say, I don't care, what sort of things are being done to cover our butts to make sure that we have proof that we did this work, that we gave the proper information over? And really, it's not our decision to make people compliant. We're not going to call the police and say they're not compliant, go arrest them. But we need to have something on hand. So what sort of steps can an HR professional take, in this instance?
Great question, and one that has come up. I can't say that we would be completely risk-free if we knew that the business was asking us to pay an independent contractor incorrectly, or a worker as an independent contractor incorrectly. I think that we would be protected if we had it in writing that we advised against it and they still wanted to go forward. And I'm guessing because we're the ones pushing that payroll out or that payment out, we do have our hand in it a little bit. ultimately that risk would follow the relationship, and that relationship would be between the worker and the business, not necessarily the payroll or the accounting folks. If they were an HR client, then we would have a little bit more risk involved, because we could potentially be saying we are misclassifying these folks on purpose, and then that just opens the door further, because we should know what we're doing, and we do. So we would just, I don't know. I have been in that situation before, and we could possibly get something in writing, but we would have to involve our attorneys, and it just gets messy. So I would say if we have a misclassified worker, we should really correct it, or at least take the actions necessary to make that worker truly independent, if we can, or just, bite that bullet and pay them as they should be, as a W-2.
Right. Yeah. So I don't want to narc at anybody. So they're going to have to learn how to be compliant. That's tough. I'm sure you've come into a situation before where you have repeatedly asked somebody to be compliant or to do the right thing, and then they don't. I'm assuming that you might have had to fire a client before, maybe. I mean, it seems like I have. I can tell you, I'll tell you a story that, again, I cannot name names, but I can give you some broad strokes about who they are. But I had to fire somebody for something that was unethical. It seems like maybe you have done that in the past, or no?
I definitely have been in that situation. I didn't fire them, though, because that wasn't my place, fortunately, to make that decision. But it did become contentious, and ultimately it made the relationship not viable.
Can I tell? Okay, can I tell you my juicy goss now?
Please.
Okay, this is a long time ago. So this was probably like 2000. Gosh, was I in Phoenix? Oh, I was in another place. I wasn't in Denver, but I can't say where I was. But I'm not even sure if I was in Phoenix. It was somewhere before I was here in the beautiful sunny Colorado. I had a client, and I was onboarding them. And this is when I was spending more of my time like doing hands-on work, because we were just, newer. And this company worked with a large oil and gas company, and they provided parts and materials and things like that to them. And it was a big, well-known company that they were providing these parts and services and everything to. And I kept seeing gift certificates being purchased. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Why are you buying so many gift certificates? And I was like, hey, if the gift certificate is over, what is it, like $50 or something, you're supposed to put it on a W-2. So what's this about? Like, why do you buy so many gift certificates? And they're like, well, it's a use it or lose it situation. And I was like, what does that mean? And they said, this company, redacted, says that their budget for our parts and services is X each year. And if we don't meet that budget, then the budget gets cut. So we get paid less. So we have worked out an arrangement with the floor manager, whoever manages inventory, that we will give them gift certificates, and they will log it as consumables going on the shelf for this very, very large company who I could see myself getting thrown under the bus and getting sued into oblivion, and just never climbing out from underneath that rock, because I would definitely get thrown under the bus if I went along with it. And I was like, please don't do that again. This is, not only is it unethical, but it is, I mean, you can get in big time trouble. This is serious. This is like fraudulent. You're sending fraudulent invoices. There's fraud happening here. This is big time trouble. And they're like, no. And they refused to not do the fraud thing. And I had to let them go. And that was sad, because at the time they were one of my biggest clients, and I was felt so very poor after they left. But what I don't feel like I'm in jail right now, or I haven't gotten in big time trouble. So that's okay. But I did have the obligation, but also the power to fire a client, because I was the owner of the business. I know, like, a different situation, but I just don't want to have to deal with that ever. I don't want to have to get in trouble.
No, I applaud you for that, for being ethical and having that as your North Star. I think that's super important, and kind of why I'm here as well, because I do appreciate that. And that's wild. I can't. Just imagine that's probably happening in so many different industries and businesses across the entire country, let alone the world.
Yeah, it's
Wild.
rough. Let the record show that everybody that is currently on this stream or listening to this podcast later, they're all standing ovation. Everybody is doing a standing ovation right now. I have gotten congratulatory back pats. Somebody sent me a gift as a thank you for being ethical. Like, I didn't even know how that happened so fast, but you know, we live in a magical time. And
Excellent.
I'm not doing any magical thinking right now.
All right.
So, any parting words for listeners who might be wondering, you know, what's next? What do I need to do? By the way, let me just digress again. I feel like I digress a lot. We haven't even gotten to like exempt versus non-exempt, and that is another thing that's like a hot topic. I'm just going to start making up new slang terms because you can get somebody classified correctly as an employee, but there's so much more. You got to figure out like, do I pay them overtime? Not like it is not so simple. I tried to make a flow chart for it. It was not fun. Broke my brain for a minute, but you know, I feel like that's the next thing that we should discuss. But for
It's a big
somebody who
one.
is worried or thinking, I want to get compliant now, or I just want to fact check things, like what's next? What should they do?
Absolutely. So, just from the independent contractor. So, I guess I should have clarified this earlier too, because maybe folks don't really understand all the different words being used. So, independent contractor, 1099, contractor, those really all fall within the same bucket. They could be called freelancers. There's some other words as well. But review that list. Review the list of everyone you send a 1099 to. That's where you want to start. And then we're going to want to cross check all of the roles and what these state specific rules are with the work that these individuals are doing. That's where it gets daunting and where I would really, highlight that you should have someone to be able to come in and do that for you with professional guidance to be able to see, what these true qualifiers are. Definitely seek professional guidance before converting any contractors to employees. Again, that's not the most risky one. It's way more risky if you're going from an employee to a contractor. So definitely bring in a professional if you're going to be doing changing an employee to a contractor anytime soon. And then just make sure that you have your policies and agreements in place to protect what you're doing in your business and to ensure that compliance. I know that sounds like it is limiting your flexibility, but it truly is not, as long as we are doing it correctly. And I definitely would say avoid the DIY HR that we talked about in our last conversation when we're talking about classification, because that can cost you and it could close your business.
True. I am realizing that I have a blog that is probably outdated on our website that explains the difference between contractors and employees and how to do a quick fact check of, if it's true or false, employee or contractor. I think that now would be a really good time for us to update it. So I think one of the follow-ups after this, whenever, people reach out to us or they look on our website, we'll have that new or updated blog out there for everybody. It's a lot to consume or to work with, but it's good to have all the information at hand and just get a better sense of what's going on. And, people want to reach out to us. How can we find you, Dan? Where do you exist on the internet?
Well, the easiest way to get a hold of me is hr@accountingpros.com because that's where I work and that's where all of my expertise lies.
You do work here. And if you see on the screen, the pros has an E at the end because it's like poetry or beautiful words, whatever. It was great when I came up with it 15 years ago.
It allows for us to be recognizable. That's
It
for sure.
does. Yeah. And if you want to find me, you can send me smoke signals. You can send a cute dog with a note in its mouth to Evergreen, Colorado, because that would make my day. Or you can hit me up on LinkedIn. It's Enzo-Garza, which I'm sure you already know that. Yeah, you can find me. I'm findable, I think. Hopefully a little bit. Until next time, thank you guys for joining, and we look forward to seeing you again and talking about yet another sexy HR and or accounting topic.